Get up. I said get up before I make you get up. The cuffs came out before the words finished. Cheap chrome scraped at the hinge from 1,000 other arms. The grass under her dress was wet from the morning's pre-funeral watering, the kind a cemetery groundskeeper turns on at 5 a.m., so the lawn will look dignified by the time the families arrive. The wet went through her dress at the knees in 2 cold patches the size of teacups. Her eulogy notes lay 6 feet from her left hand, 3 index cards held together with the same paperclip her son had used in his 4th grade book report. She did not look at the cards. She looked at the ground. Officer Chase Halverson put a knee between her shoulder blades. Hands behind your back. Now. What he could not have known, would not know for another 46 minutes, was that the casket 8 feet from where he had just dropped a 51-year-old woman into the dirt held 7 months of files he had spent 3 years convinced no one would ever read. Audio, photographs, a draft complaint with his badge number, 1147, on the cover sheet. The young paramedic in the satin-lined coffin had been documenting him since the first time their cruisers passed on a back service road outside the county landfill, and the woman in the wet black dress was the only person in Mobile County still authorized to read what the boy had left behind. He did not know any of that. He only knew what he had been told to know, by people who had been told what to want. A camera lifted from somewhere in the second row of folding chairs, then another, then a phone clipped to a small chest harness, held by a woman in a red blazer who had been live to 38,000 viewers since the cruiser pulled up at the cemetery gate. Halverson did not see her yet. He was looking at the back of Aria Whitfield's head and counting, in his head, the steps to his vehicle. His partner, Officer Tobias Reeves, 26, 3 months out of academy, took 1 step back and did not raise his hand to his radio. His body cam stayed running. The red light on the chest plate stayed steady. The grass made a small sound under the cuffs as they closed. Above the open grave, a kind of stillness moved through the gathering. It was not the quiet of grief. It was the quiet of 140 people, all at once, deciding they were not going home. If you've never seen a small-town police department dismantle itself in a single afternoon, stay with this one. Hit subscribe. By the time the cruiser pulls into the precinct, the man who put those cuffs on will not have a job to come back to. 8 days earlier, the road that took Justin Whitfield off the world had been freshly crowned, the asphalt still smelling faintly of pitch. The county shop had completed an overlay on County Road 19 the Tuesday before. Justin's ambulance left the road at 4:41 p.m. on a Wednesday, on a dry shoulder, on a curve he had taken every shift for 3 years. The crash report, drafted by Bayard Springs PD and signed off by Lieutenant Dane Voss, ran 2.5 pages. It listed weather as clear, road as dry, vehicle as in service, contributing factors as none. It did not list a 14-minute gap in the dash camera feed between 4:26 and 4:40 p.m. It did not list the second set of skid marks 23 feet behind the primary scene, photographed by a county engineer the next morning and never entered into evidence. Justin's mother had been provided a copy of the report at 6 p.m. the same evening, in person, by a young chaplain who had cried more than she had. Aria Whitfield had not cried in front of anyone, not when the chaplain told her, not when the funeral director walked her through casket selection, not when her sister Delphine, 3 years her elder and twice as loud about everything that mattered, held her at the front door of her own home and said the only word a mourning sister can say. She had cried once, at 4:15 a.m. on the 3rd day, in a small bathroom in the back of her own office. She had washed her face. She had returned to her desk. She had drafted a memo to her 3 associates that began, "I will be unavailable for the remainder of this week. The June 17th filing on the Stallworth matter is moved to the 18th. Please extend my appreciation to the court." That had been 8 days ago. She had spent 6 of those days handling the small bureaucracies grief is supposed to allow you to delegate, but rarely does. Casket, plot, hearse, programs. She had ordered 75 programs. The funeral home director had gently asked if she wanted 100. She had said no. She had been wrong. By the morning of the service, the order at the funeral home had been raised twice. The final number printed was 240. The morning of the funeral, she was up at 5:15 a.m. She did not need an alarm. She had not used an alarm since she was 31 years old and had filed her first case in front of a federal judge who terrified her so completely she had begun rising before dawn out of sheer respect. The habit had outlasted the judge. She made coffee in a French press because Justin had been the kind of young man who, at 24, had thought espresso machines were a moral failure. She drank it standing at the kitchen counter, in the same spot where Justin had stood drinking the same coffee from the same press 8 days earlier, and she held the cup until it was empty, and then she rinsed the press in 3 steps that she had performed 9,000 times. Delphine arrived at 6:05 a.m. Delphine was a woman who entered every room as if she had built it. She wore a black wrap dress and a pearl pin that had belonged to their mother. She did not knock. "You ate?" "Coffee." "That is not eating." "Delphine." Delphine set a foil tray on the counter. She did not open it. She looked at her younger sister, and her younger sister looked back, and there was nothing they had not already said in the 8 days since the chaplain. "You wrote it?" Aria nodded. 3 cards. "I cut it twice." "Cut what twice?" "His age. I kept saying his age." Delphine put both hands on the counter and exhaled, slow, the way their mother had exhaled before saying something honest. "You don't have to read." "I have to read." "Reuben can read." "Reuben isn't his mother." Delphine did not argue. She had stopped arguing on the second day, when she had realized that arguing with Aria Whitfield about what Aria Whitfield was going to do was the same as arguing with the tide about its schedule. She moved to the sink, rinsed the press a second time, though it did not need it, and looked out the window at the black wrought-iron gate Justin had repainted last summer. By 6:30 a.m., the house was full. Marcus Llewellyn arrived first, in a charcoal suit that did not quite fit at the shoulders. Marcus was 25, 3 months younger than Justin, and the two of them had run the same 947 rotation at Mobile County EMS for almost 3 years. He had been the first responder on Justin's wreck. He had sat in the back of his own ambulance for 45 minutes afterward, not moving, not speaking, until his supervisor had walked him out and driven him home. He stopped in the front hall and held Aria too long. "Mrs. Whitfield." "Marcus, thank you for coming." He stepped back. He looked at her. He did not look at her the way the others did. The others looked at her as if she were a building they were afraid to enter. Marcus looked at her like a man with a question he could not yet bring himself to ask. I wanted to say, he left some things. With me. For you." "Marcus, not today. I didn't bring them today. I want you to know." Aria put a hand on his shoulder, briefly, the way she had touched her son's shoulder 1,000 times when he had come home shaken and could not yet explain why. "When you're ready," she said. "Whenever that is." "There's a thumb drive," he said quietly, into the small space between them. "And a notebook. And he told me 2 weeks before. He said, if anything happens to me on shift, you give these to my mother. Not to the captain, not to internal, to my mother. He was very specific about it." She did not break stride. She did not lower her hand from his shoulder. She did not, in any way that a person watching from across the room would have been able to read, register what he had said. "Thank you, Marcus." "Mrs. Whitfield, after today. Bring them after today. Tomorrow, if you can." "Yes, ma'am." He nodded twice, like a man trying to convince himself he had not just said too much. Then he went to the kitchen and asked Delphine for a plate, and Delphine, who could read a face better than most lawyers Aria had ever worked with, watched him eat in silence and made a mental note to ask later what he had been about to say. Aria stood at the front hall for a moment after he left her. She did not move toward the kitchen. She did not move toward the living room. She put her right hand, very briefly, against the wall, palm flat, and held it there. Then she lowered the hand. She straightened the collar of her dress with 2 precise small motions. She walked into the parlor and greeted the next 4 arrivals by name. If anyone in the parlor had been watching closely, they would have seen one thing only, that for 14 seconds Aria Whitfield was, in the small, careful way of a person who has trained herself to never appear surprised, recalibrating. The list of 9 names she had been carrying in her head for 18 months had just acquired a 10th thing. Not a name, a weight. A boy who had been keeping records his mother did not know about, in service of a case she had been building without him, against a department they had both, in their separate corners of the same county, been watching for years. She did not allow herself, for the rest of the morning, to think about the thumb drive. She could not afford it. The list she would think about. The list was a list. The list could be rehearsed. The thumb drive was a wound. She straightened the collar of her dress for the 2nd time. She thanked the next aunt who walked through the front door. Aria moved through the house the way she moved through a courtroom on a docket day. She remembered every name. She thanked every person. She accepted casseroles with the gentle authority of someone who has been given casseroles by neighbors for 30 years and understands what they mean. The aunt who was also a deaconess at the church. The 2 cousins from Pensacola who had driven in at 5 a.m. Ayanna Beaumont, her cousin from her mother's side, in from Atlanta, with a small camera bag over her shoulder because Ayanna was a journalist who did not stop being a journalist for funerals. By 7:45 a.m., the cars were lined down both sides of Briarvine Lane. By 8:10 a.m., the procession had formed. The hearse pulled away from the curb at 8:22 a.m., which was 3 minutes later than scheduled, because the funeral director had insisted on counting cars before they left, and there had been more cars than he had expected to count. Aria sat in the 2nd car with Delphine and Ayanna. She held the 3 cards in her lap. She looked out the window at small things, the way she had been taught, by years of practice, to look at small things. The driver of the 3rd car back-tapped his horn twice in apology when he overcorrected at a stop sign. A young woman on the corner of Briarvine and Oak stood with a coffee cup pressed to her chest and bowed her head as the hearse passed. A black and white cruiser, BSPD-19, pulled out of the parking lot of the Sunoco on Madison and fell in 3 cars behind the procession. The driver of that cruiser did not flash his lights or run his siren. He drove the way a man drives when he wants to be noticed without being asked why. Aria saw the cruiser. She did not say anything. She made a small, careful note of the unit number and the time, 6 minutes past 8, the way she had been making small, careful notes for 30 years, and she did not yet know what the note would matter for. Street. Anselm Memorial Garden was a 48-acre tract of pine and grass on the southern edge of Bayard Springs, set back from the highway by an oak-lined drive that the cemetery's groundskeepers maintained at a slope so gentle the hearse could approach the chapel without ever feeling the road change beneath it. The chapel sat at the head of a small ridge. Below it, a half-circle drive ran past the open-air pavilion where graveside services were performed in clear weather, and below that the rows of headstones began, set in the kind of even ranks Justin had once called almost military, the only time he had ever come with her to visit her father's plot. The procession turned in at 8:36 a.m. Halverson's cruiser was already parked at the cemetery gate, BSPD-19, parallel to the curb, lights off, engine running. Halverson stood beside the driver's side door with 1 boot on the curb and 1 on the asphalt. He was 31, 6'2", blonde crew cut, with a chest plate camera blinking a steady red. His partner, Officer Reeves, sat in the passenger seat with the door open and 1 foot on the running board, watching the cars come in. Halverson watched too. He watched the way a man watches a herd he is about to count. The 3rd car in the procession, a borrowed sedan driven by Justin's high school classmate, Andre Pellerin, slowed at the gate. Halverson stepped off the curb. License and registration. Andre looked up at him. He was 25, slim, in a gray suit. I'm with the funeral, sir. License, registration. It's a procession. The hearse is right there. Did I ask about the hearse? Andre's jaw tightened. He reached into the glove compartment. Reeves, in the passenger seat, said something, low, that Halverson did not appear to hear. Andre handed over the license. Halverson held it for a long moment, examined the photograph, examined Andre's face, and then handed it back without comment. He stepped back. He let the car pass. He turned his attention to the next car. The fourth car was driven by Reverend Cornelius Pace. Pastor Pace was 68 years old, had presided over more funerals at St. Anselm than the cemetery's own director, and was, in the part of Bayard Springs that lived east of the railroad tracks, one of the last men in the county whose name on a letterhead could move a city council. He rolled his window down before Halverson reached him. "Officer. License. Officer Halverson. I have presided here every Saturday morning for the last 11 years. I am the officiating minister for this service. License. I am not going to ask twice." Pastor Pace produced his license. He produced it slowly. He produced it the way a man produces a license when he is making a record of being asked. Halverson took it, examined the pastor, and handed it back without a word. The fifth car, the sixth, the seventh. Each one stopped. Each one was made to stop. Each one was made to wait. The seventh car was driven by an elderly cousin whose hands shook on the wheel. Halverson made him produce his license, his registration, and his proof of insurance. He kept the registration card for 38 seconds while he examined it under the morning sun. He gave it back without comment. Inside the cruiser, Officer Reeves sat in the passenger seat with the door open. He spoke once, low, across the roof. "Chase, the hearse is at the chapel. They're waiting on us to clear." "They can wait." "We're 9 cars behind." "They can wait." Reeves did not push it. He had been 3 months on the job. Halverson had been 10 years. Reeves was 26 and black and a former Marine military police corporal, and had, in his 14 weeks at Bayard Springs PD, learned the same lesson that every junior officer in every small department in America has learned, which was that there were 2 ways a partner could speak to a senior officer in front of a civilian, and the way that ended the senior officer's sentence was not the way that kept you employed. He sat back. He watched the procession crawl forward. He watched Halverson harass the 8th car and the 9th. By the time the 2nd car, with Aria in it, reached the gate, the procession had backed up onto the highway shoulder, and the hearse had been waiting at the chapel for 9 minutes. When Aria's car pulled even with the cruiser, Halverson did not approach the driver's side. He approached the rear passenger window. He bent slightly. He looked through the glass. He saw a black woman in a black dress. He straightened. He waved them through. He did not look at her again. He did not need to. Inside the car, Iana, in the front seat, pulled her phone from her purse and set its screen up on her thigh. She did not hit record, not yet. But her thumb rested on the volume button the way a paramedic's hand rests on a chest pocket, where the ammonia capsules live. In the back seat, Aria spoke to Delphine without turning her head. "Number on the cruiser." 19, BSPD-19. "Officer at the gate." "Tall blonde, crew cut, younger one in the passenger seat." "Names on the chest tags." "I couldn't read the blonde." "Younger one was Reeves." "Time." 8:41. Delphine did not ask why she was being asked. Delphine had been answering her sister's quiet questions since they were 8 and 10 years old, and had long ago understood that the questions were not, ever, idle. Iana, in the front seat, glanced back over her shoulder. "You want me to get out and shoot the gate?" "No." "Cousin?" "No." "Cousin, I have been shooting B-roll for 22 years. I can shoot a cemetery gate without anyone knowing I am shooting a cemetery gate." "Iana." "Yes." "Stay in the car." Iana stayed in the car. She did not lower her phone, however. Her thumb stayed on the volume button. The graveside pavilion held 200 chairs. By 8:50 a.m. every chair was filled, and another 40 people stood 3 deep along the back. The casket sat on the lift mechanism over the open grave, draped in a white pall, with a single arrangement of yellow tea roses Justin's grandmother had planted in 1979. Pastor Pace took the small lectern. He thanked the family. He thanked the gathering. He read briefly 2 passages he had selected at Aria's request, neither of which dwelled on the manner of the death. He spoke for 11 minutes. He spoke about the boy he had baptized. He did not speak about the man he had become, because he understood that the woman in the front row was about to do that herself. At 9:06 a.m., Pastor Pace turned and gestured to Aria. "Friends, the boy's mother." Aria stood. She walked to the lectern. She set the 3 cards on the slanted wood. She placed her hands flat on either side of them. She did not look at the casket. She looked instead at the back row, where her cousin Iana stood with the phone in her hand, and at the row of 3 folding chairs to the left of the pavilion, where a woman in a navy suit sat alone, hands folded in her lap, watching her with a calm, undisturbed steadiness that Aria recognized without naming. "My son," Aria said, "kept a list." Her voice did not break. It did not shake. It simply moved out from her, in the steady, courtroom-trained register of a woman who had been speaking under pressure since she was 23 years old. He kept a list of the things he learned in the back of an ambulance. He kept it on the inside cover of a notebook he carried for 3 years. The first item on the list he wrote when he was 21. It said, "You cannot save the patient by lying to them." The second item, written 6 months later, said, "You cannot save the patient by lying to yourself." Behind her, the cruiser, BSP D-19, eased onto the gravel of the half-circle drive. It came in slow. It stopped 20 feet behind the rear row of chairs. The driver's side door opened. Halverson stepped out. He left the door open. He left the engine running. "My son believed," Aria said, "that the work was the report, that what you wrote down was what would still be true after you were gone. He carried a small camera. He carried a notebook. He carried a recorder, sometimes, in his shift bag. He once told me, the year he turned 23, that the most important sentence in any report is the one that documents what you did not do and why." She looked up briefly from her cards. She looked across the rows of folded hands and lowered eyes. She looked at the woman in the navy suit at the back, whose face had not moved in 11 minutes. She looked at her sister in the front row, who was already crying and would not stop crying for another 20 minutes. She looked at Marcus Llewellyn, 3 rows back, who had his hands clasped and his head down, and who was, she could see, holding the brim of his hat against his thigh in the way a man holds a thing he does not trust himself to set down. "He kept a list," she said again. "He kept a list of moments he wanted to be the kind of man who wrote down. The night a 62-year-old man on a back road in Theodore had a heart attack at the wheel of his pickup. The afternoon a 12-year-old girl with no insurance came off a bicycle on Pine Street and asked him, in the back of the rig, whether her mother was going to be mad about the bicycle. The Wednesday morning, he held the hand of a woman he had never met as she sat in the front yard of her own house, looking at the body of her husband, and asked him the question that paramedics, in the back hallways of every hospital on the Gulf Coast, will tell you they hear more often than any other. She asked him, did he go quick? And he told her the truth. He told her the truth because he believed, the way I have raised him to believe, that the truth was the gift, even when the truth was hard. A folding chair scraped. Heads turned. Halverson was walking up the center aisle. Pastor Pace stepped forward from his place beside the casket and raised one hand gently, the way a man raises a hand at a child crossing a street. "Officer," he said quietly, "we are in a service." "Step aside, Reverend." "Officer." "I said step aside." Halverson did not slow. He came up the aisle past row after row of seated mourners, and the heads of those mourners turned with him the way a field of sunflowers turns toward a shadow. Iana raised her phone. Her thumb hit the red circle. The recording began at 9:09 a.m. Aria did not stop speaking. She slowed. She set down the second card. She kept her hands flat on the lectern. "My son believed," she said, "in being a witness. In the small, simple, exhausting work of being a witness. He believed, the way our people have always believed, that the only thing you have at the end of a hard day is the truth of what you saw. Halverson stopped 4 feet from the lectern. He did not lower his voice. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from the podium and come with me." The pavilion went quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when 200 people stop breathing at the same time. Aria did not look up. She moved one card behind another, gently, the way a person moves a card in a child's game. "Officer," she said, "I am in the middle of my son's eulogy. If you will give me 3 minutes."
"Ma'am, I have a complaint to follow up on." 3 minutes. Now, ma'am." In the back row, the woman in the navy suit, Camille Easterly, 63 years old, federal judge for the Southern District of Alabama for 16 of those years, friend of the Whitfield family for 31, did not move. She placed one hand on her own knee and the other on the empty chair beside her, the way a woman steadies a small boat she is about to step off of, and she watched. In the second row, Ayanna Beaumont, the cousin from Atlanta, kept her phone level. She angled it slightly. She caught the badge number, 1147, in clear focus. In the third row, the woman in the red blazer, Naima Tatum, 29, with 412,000 subscribers on a video channel called Southern Eyes, raised the small phone clipped to her chest harness, opened her live application, hit go, and within 9 seconds had 38,000 viewers watching what would become, by sundown, the most shared local news clip in the state of Alabama. Halverson stepped forward. He put his hand on Aria's elbow. "Ma'am, I am not going to say it again." Aria did not pull away. She turned slowly with the patience of someone who has learned, through long practice, that the worst thing you can do in front of the wrong man with the wrong authority is move quickly. "Officer Halverson," she said, "what is the basis for the complaint?" "That's not your concern. It is the basis on which you are detaining me. By statute, it is my concern. Ma'am, we can do this here, or we can do it at the station." "Officer." His grip tightened. His thumb pressed into the soft place above her elbow, where the bone is closest to the skin. She did not flinch. The crowd did. A small noise, half a syllable, went through the rows of folding chairs, and a man, 2 rows back, Justin's high school football coach, half rose from his seat and was put down again by the woman next to him, who had a hand on his forearm and a look on her face that was older than the cemetery. Halverson pulled. "Walk." "Officer, I will walk. Release my arm." "Walk." He pulled harder. Her hip caught the edge of the lectern. The 3 cards slid off the slanted wood and fell in a small fan onto the gravel below. She looked down at them. She looked back at him. "Officer Halverson," she said gently, the way a teacher says a child's name when the child has done something neither of them can undo, "you are going to release my arm, and you are going to step back. We are going to walk to your vehicle together. I am not going to resist. I am asking you, on behalf of every person in this pavilion, to allow my son's pastor to finish this service before you remove me from it." He laughed. It was a short laugh, a breath through the nose, the kind of sound a man makes when he has been waiting all morning for an excuse and has finally been handed one. "Ma'am, you are obstructing a peace officer in the performance of his duties. You can finish your speech down at the station." He turned. He pulled. She moved with him, 2 steps, 3, and at the 3rd step his boot caught the leg of the lectern. The lectern tipped. He lost a half-second of balance. She did not. She steadied. He recovered, and in recovering he transferred his weight through her arm and brought her down sideways onto the wet grass beside the open grave. She landed on her right hip and her right palm. She did not cry out. The dirt at the edge of the grave came away under her hand in a small, dark wedge. Halverson dropped his knee onto the small of her back. "Hands behind your back." "Officer." "Hands." She placed her left hand carefully behind her, palm up, the way a person who has been taught the position places it. Her right hand followed. He pulled them together hard enough that her shoulders came up off the grass. He clicked the cuff over her left wrist.
He clicked the cuff over her right. Iana's phone was 3 feet away. The pavilion, all 240 people of it, was on its feet. It was the rising that did it. Not a shout, not a surge, a rising. 240 bodies in 240 different rows of chairs stood at the same time, the way a congregation stands when a preacher reaches the verse they have been waiting for. Folding chairs scraped, programs rustled. Someone in the third row dropped a hymnal. No one moved forward, no one charged. They simply stood in their black suits and their black dresses and their pinned hats, and they watched. And the quiet of that watching was louder than any sound a crowd of that size could have made. In the back, Naima Tatum held her phone steady. The viewer count moved. 41,000. 43. 46. By the time Halverson lifted Aria to her feet, the live count read 52,400 and counted upward by 1,000 every 6 seconds. Naima narrated quietly into the small lavalier microphone clipped to the inside of her blazer. Her voice, by long professional habit, never rose. What you are watching is happening live. The gentleman in uniform is Bayard Springs Police Department. The woman on the ground is the mother of the deceased. The deceased is a 24-year-old paramedic named Justin Whitfield, who served Mobile County for 3 years. I want to say that one more time. The mother of the boy in the casket has just been put on the ground by a uniformed officer at her own son's funeral. The viewer count, when she finished the sentence, read 61,000. In the front row, Pastor Pace had not moved. He stood with the open program of the service folded once in his left hand. His right hand was at his side, the fingers slightly curled. He was 68 years old and had spent 41 years in the pulpit, and had learned, in those 41 years, the difference between the moment when a congregation needed to be calmed and the moment when a congregation needed to be allowed. This was the second kind of moment. He did not lift his hand. He did not speak. He looked instead at Aria, and Aria looked at him, and a very small understanding passed between them across the gravel of the center aisle that had nothing to do with church, and everything to do with the long memory of a county that had buried more young people than it had ever wanted to. In the second row, an elderly man named Theodore Carlyle, 84 years old, who had marched in Selma when he was 17, and had not marched in anything since because he had not, in his own opinion, been called on to march, took off his hat. He held it in both hands at his chest. He did not lower his eyes. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood with his hat in his hands, and the 4 people in the row behind him did the same. And the 4 people in the row behind them did the same. And within 20 seconds, every man in the pavilion who was wearing a hat was holding it at his chest. Halverson did not see it. He was looking at Aria. He was looking at the dirt on her dress and at his own breathing, and he was telling himself in the back of his head that this was the part he had practiced. Officer Reeves had walked up behind him. Reeves was looking at the crowd. Reeves's body cam was running. Reeves's hand was on the strap of his radio and was not on the radio itself. He spoke quietly, close to Halverson's shoulder. "Chase. Hey, Chase." "What?" "Look around." "Get her in the car." "Chase, look around." Halverson looked. 240 people, standing, not moving, looking at him. He did not see Iana's phone. He did not see Naima's. He did not see 8 rows back. The woman in the navy suit, who was now standing as well, her hand still on the back of the empty chair beside her, her face calm in the way that a face is calm only after 16 years of being looked at by other people in courtrooms. He did not see Pastor Pace, who had picked up the 3 index cards from the gravel, and now held them at his chest like a man holding the only document in the world. Halverson turned. He pulled Aria with him. He started down the center aisle. The crowd did not part. Not at first. For 4 full seconds, 240 people stood in his way without moving, and Halverson, who had spent 10 years learning how to move people, did not know what to do. It was Pastor Pace who moved first. He stepped down from the lectern with the index cards in his hand. He came up the aisle slowly. He passed Halverson without looking at him. He stopped in front of Aria. He held out the cards. "Counselor," he said. It was the first word he had spoken to her, in public, in 26 years of knowing her, that was not her first name. She took the cards in her cuffed hands as best she could. "Reverend," she said, "finish the service." "I will." Halverson pulled her past him. The crowd, slowly, parted. Not all at once, in small movements. A man stepped half a foot to his right. A woman lowered her chin and shifted her shoulders. The path opened, 3 feet wide, no wider, and Halverson walked Aria down it, and the 240 people who had risen did not sit. They turned. They followed him with their eyes the whole long walk to the cruiser. The walk was 83 feet. It took 91 seconds. Iana walked it with him, 6 paces behind, phone in her hand, recording. Naima Tatum walked it on the outside of the chairs, parallel, live streaming, narrating in a low-level voice she had learned in 200 prior live streams. This is happening right now at St. Anselm Memorial Garden in Bayard Springs, Mobile County, Alabama. The officer is Chase Halverson, badge 1147, Bayard Springs Police Department. The woman he just put in handcuffs is the mother of the deceased. The funeral has been in progress for 19 minutes. Stay with me. Stay with me. The viewer count, when she said it the second time, read 78,000. At the cruiser, Halverson opened the rear passenger door. He put a hand on the back of Aria's head, the way an officer does to keep a suspect from striking the doorframe, but he did it with 2 more pounds of pressure than the maneuver requires, and he angled her so that her right shoulder caught the metal of the doorframe before her head reached the opening. The shoulder hit. She made a small sound. The crowd made the same sound. Halverson heard neither. He pushed her in. Reeves stood at the cruiser's front passenger door. He had not moved to assist. His body cam was still recording. His radio was still silent. "Chase," he said again, low. "I think we need to call the watch commander. Get in the car." "Chase, there are 300 people out here." "Get in the car, Reeves." Reeves looked at the crowd. He looked at the woman in the back seat, who was sitting up, slowly, her cuffed hands now in front of her on the seat where she had managed, somehow, to bring them around. He looked at her face. Her face was calm. It was the kind of calm that a young officer, 3 months out of academy, sees in his own training videos and is told, by his instructors, is the calm of a person who has been here before, in some form, in some other room, with some other set of cuffs. Reeves did not get in the car immediately. Reeves did one thing first. He turned, very slightly, so that his body cam, mounted square on his chest, took in the entire crowd, the entire face of Pastor Pace, the entire frame of the cruiser with its open driver's side door and its 3-letter unit number painted on the rear quarter panel. He held the angle for 3 seconds. He let the camera see what he was seeing. Then he got in the car. Halverson dropped into the driver's seat. He put the cruiser in gear. He pulled forward. The crowd, at the front of the cruiser, did not move. He laid on the horn. The crowd did not move. He laid on the horn again. A man at the front of the crowd, 50 years old, in a black suit, with a deacon's pin on his lapel, raised one hand, palm out, to the windshield. He did not raise it as a fist. He raised it as a stop sign. Behind him, 12 other men of varying ages raised their hands the same way. Halverson rolled his window down. "Move, now, or every one of you is going down with her." The deacon did not lower his hand. "Officer," he said calmly, "we are not in your way. We are in our own way. We will move when the woman in the back of your car has finished saying goodbye to her son, and not 1 second before." In the back seat, Aria, her hands cuffed in front of her, the dirt of the cemetery still drying on the right side of her dress, leaned forward as far as the seatbelt arrangement would allow her. "Brother Walters," she said gently through the open window, "let him through." "Counselor, let him through. The Reverend will finish. I will be back." The deacon, Walters, did not move for 2 seconds. Then he lowered his hand. He stepped to the side. The men on either side of him stepped with him. The path opened. Halverson drove through it. Naima Tatum, on the outside of the line, ran for her own car parked along the shoulder of the cemetery drive. She had her phone in one hand. She had her keys in the other. The live stream count, when she pulled out behind the cruiser 88 seconds later, read 141,000. In the cruiser, Halverson took the cemetery drive at 38 miles an hour. The posted limit was 15. In the back seat, Aria Whitfield closed her eyes for 1 second only. She opened them. She turned her head to her right. Through the rear window of the cruiser, she watched street. Anselm Memorial Garden recede behind her, and the small white pavilion, and the small group of people gathered around her son's casket, and Pastor Pace, who had remounted the lectern and was speaking again, words she could not hear, into a microphone she could no longer see. The cruiser turned onto Highway 90. The cemetery disappeared behind a stand of pine. She closed her eyes again. She did not close them in grief. She closed them in calculation. If you're following this in real time, take 10 seconds, hit the like button, and share this video. The next 40 minutes will explain why a small-town police chief is going to be standing on his own front steps before noon, reading a statement he never thought he would have to read. The Bayard Springs Police Department occupied a single-story brick building at the corner of Holcomb Avenue and 3rd Street, 3 blocks south of City Hall, 4 blocks north of the railroad tracks. It had been built in 1974, expanded in 1991, and had not been seriously renovated since. The lobby ran 20 feet by 30, with a reception window cut into the rear wall, and a bench along the left side that had been bolted to the floor in 1986 because too many people had picked it up and thrown it. Above the reception window, 3 framed signs hung in a row. The first was a department mission statement. The second was a city ordinance regarding controlled substances on municipal property. The third was a placard, 16 inches by 20, with the heading Alabama Code Title 13A. Public notice printed in block capitals across the top, and below it in smaller print, the full text of 2 statute sections. Section 13, a -10-41, resisting arrest. Section 13, a -3-23, justifiable use of physical force in defense of a person. Aria Whitfield read the placard from the lobby bench. She read it slowly. She had been seated on the bench for 6 minutes. Her hands were still cuffed. The cuffs had been tightened to a notch that was, by departmental policy, not the notch they should have been tightened to. The notch she had been cuffed to was 1 click past the pressure point on her left ulnar nerve. She had not mentioned it. She had not asked for adjustment. She was reading the placard. Halverson stood at the reception window. He was filling out an arrest report in handwriting because the precinct's intake terminal had been down for maintenance for 2 weeks. A status the department had not bothered to escalate because Lieutenant Voss preferred handwritten reports for reasons that had never appeared in any policy manual. Officer Reeves stood 3 feet behind him with his hands at his sides. His body cam was still on, the red light still steady. The woman behind the reception window was Sergeant Marlene Bricker. Sergeant Bricker was 47 years old, had worked the booking desk at Bayard Springs PD for 9 years, and had, in those 9 years, become the kind of booking sergeant whose handwriting on a property log was treated by every officer in the building as more authoritative than the property itself. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain. Her hair was set. Her uniform shirt had been pressed within the last hour. She did not look up when Halverson set the report on her counter. Female, black, 51, Whitfield, Aria, charge, obstruction of a peace officer in performance of his duties. Possible additional, resisting arrest. Address on the license. License is in the purse. Purse is on the counter. Phone, wallet, keys, standard. You want me to bring her up? You want me to... In a minute. Sergeant Bricker turned a page on her own logbook. She did not look at Aria. She had, in fact, not looked at Aria once. In the 6 minutes Aria had been seated on the bench, despite Aria sitting in her direct sight line. Aria did not look at Sergeant Bricker either. She looked at the placard. At the 8-minute mark, Lieutenant Dane Voss came through the door behind the reception window. Voss was 44, lean, mustache trimmed, with the careful bearing of a man who had wanted very much to make captain and had been told, twice, that he would not. He carried a coffee mug. He looked at the report on Bricker's counter. He looked at Halverson. He looked briefly at Aria on the bench. He looked at Aria for slightly longer than he should have, and then he looked back down at the report. Halverson. Lieutenant. What's the complainant on this? Anonymous tip. Came in at 0704. Suspicious gathering at St. Anselm. Possible disturbance. Possible weapons. Possible weapons. That was the language of the call, sir. Subject was uncooperative on initial contact. Refused to cease the disturbance when ordered. Resisted detainment. Resisted how? Refused verbal commands. Pulled away from contact. Pulled away. Yes, sir. Voss took a sip of his coffee. He did not say anything for a long 4 seconds. Then he turned a page on the report. He read the next page. He turned another. He read that one. Halverson. Sir, you arrested the mother of the deceased in the middle of the funeral at the gravesite on a complaint of suspicious gathering. The complaint was for a possible disturbance, sir. We have the right and the obligation to follow up. Sir. We'll talk. Voss turned. He went back through the door. The door closed behind him. Halverson waited 4 seconds. Then he turned and walked toward Aria. On your feet. She rose. Slowly. The cuffs at her wrists pulled at the same nerve they had pulled at on the bench. She did not flinch. Property inventory, he said. He led her to the counter. Sergeant Bricker finally looked up. She regarded Aria the way a tax assessor regards an empty lot. She opened the purse. She emptied it onto the counter in one motion, the way a person empties a bag of groceries when they intend to put them away in any order they please. Phone, wallet, keys, a small notebook, leather-bound, 3 pens, a pack of unopened tissues, a cosmetic case, a folded program from the funeral with Justin's photograph on the front, a pair of reading glasses, an emergency inhaler that had belonged to Justin and that Aria had been carrying in her purse, untouched since the Wednesday of the wreck. 2 business cards in a small silver case. Sergeant Bricker did not pick up the business card case. She moved it to the side, with one finger. Items, she said, in the bored sing-song cadence of a woman who had performed this ritual 9,000 times. Phone, wallet, keys, notebook, leather, pens, 3, tissues, package, sealed, cosmetic case, glasses, inhaler, prescription, funeral program, paper. Aria watched the tip of Bricker's pen. Sergeant, she said gently, the card case. What about it? You did not log it. I will log it. You moved past it. I am getting to it. And the watch on my wrist. You did not log that either. Bricker looked up. The sing-song was gone. Excuse me? My wristwatch. You have not logged it. By policy, you are required to inventory all personal property on the body of the detainee, including jewelry. You want to tell me how to do my job? I am telling you what your job is. Bricker's mouth set. She picked up the pen again. She wrote in the cramped corner of the property log, watch, gold tone, wrist, female. She wrote it small, the way a person writes something they have been forced to acknowledge. She did not pick up the card case. She closed the log. Print her. Halverson took Aria's left wrist. He uncuffed it from the right. He guided her left hand to the print roller. He placed her index finger on the ink pad. He pressed. He pressed harder than the procedure required. The pad was set in a small steel housing, and the housing had a raised edge, and Aria's fingertip, pressed against the housing under the weight of Halverson's thumb, hit the steel. It did not break the skin. It did, however, drive a crescent-shaped bruise into the pad of her finger that would still be visible 6 days later when an FBI evidence technician photographed it for an exhibit binder. Halverson rolled the finger across the card. Next, middle finger, ring, pinky, thumb. He did the right hand the same way. Halfway through the right hand, ink smeared. It smeared because Halverson rolled the middle finger of the right hand at an angle that was not the angle the procedure required, and the ink, instead of transferring cleanly to the print card, transferred across the back of Aria's wrist and from her wrist to the cuff of her right sleeve. The black ink on the black silk of her dress was not visible. The black ink on the cuff of the sleeve, where the silk was a slightly different weave, was visible immediately. A long, dark smudge, 6 inches long, an inch wide. She looked down at it. She did not say anything.
Across the room, Lieutenant Voss had not moved from the corner of the counter. He had been watching the print process. He looked at the smudge on the sleeve. He looked at Halverson's hand on Aria's wrist. He looked at the angle. He turned a page in the report on his counter. He made a small, careful, dark blue tick mark in the margin. Aria, without lifting her head, spoke quietly to Halverson. "Officer, don't talk. My finger. Don't talk. You have my fingerprints. I am giving them to you. I am asking you to give me back my hand." He did not answer. He took her thumb. He rolled it. He let the wrist go. Bricker watched. Bricker did not say anything. Bricker had spent 9 years on the booking desk and had seen, in those 9 years, 100 suspects fingerprinted in ways that violated department policy. She had not, in those 9 years, ever once said anything about it. She did not say anything now. She reached for the wipe dispenser. She slid a wipe across the counter in Aria's general direction, the way a waitress slides a check across a counter at a diner. Aria looked at the wipe. She did not pick it up. She lifted her own hand, her right hand, the hand with the smudge. She held it up, palm down, the way a witness holds a hand at the start of an oath. "Sergeant?" "What?" "For the record. The wipe was offered after the print, not before." "What of it?"
Department policy is that wipes are offered after the print and that the booking sergeant is to assist the detainee in removing ink residue when the detainee's hands are restrained or otherwise unable to wipe themselves. Bricker's mouth thinned. "Your hands are not restrained." "My right hand has just been released. My left hand is not. I am one-handed. By policy, you are required to assist." "By policy, I am required to do my job, miss. By policy, I am asking you to do it." Voss, in the corner, made another small, dark blue tick mark. He did not look up when he made it. Bricker stared at Aria for 2 long seconds. Then she picked up the wipe. She walked around the counter. She held the wipe out at arm's length. She did not bend toward Aria's hand. She did not assist. She held the wipe and she waited for Aria to take it. Aria took the wipe with her free right hand. She wiped her own fingers, slowly, with the unhurried attention of a person who had once been a very young lawyer in a very old firm and had been taught, by an even older partner, that the way you cleaned ink off your fingers in a deposition was a thing other people watched, whether or not you were aware of it being watched. She handed the used wipe back to Bricker. Bricker did not take it. Bricker walked back behind her counter. Aria placed the wipe, folded once, on the corner of the counter, in the precise spot where Bricker had placed the silver business card case 15 minutes earlier, and not logged it. Voss, in the corner, made a third tick mark. Halverson cuffed her again, both wrists. Photograph. He guided her by the elbow to the wall. He turned her to face the camera. The camera was a small, ceiling-mounted unit on a tripod, controlled remotely by Sergeant Bricker. A line of black tape ran across the floor where the subject was meant to stand. He stood her on the line. He stepped back. "Hold the placard." He handed her a small white placard with her booking number written on it in marker. The placard had been written on 3 minutes earlier by Bricker, from a pre-printed list. The number on the placard was 240611-1147. The last 4 digits were Halverson's badge number. Aria looked at the placard. She looked at Halverson. She did not say anything. He stepped back. "Look at the camera." She looked at the camera. The shutter clicked. "Turn left." She turned. The shutter clicked. "Turn right." She turned. The shutter clicked. He took the placard back. He tossed it onto the counter. The placard slid. Bricker did not pick it up. In the corner, Officer Reeves had been watching the booking from the moment Halverson uncuffed Aria's left hand. He had not spoken. He had not moved. He had stood with his hands at his sides and his body cam at his chest, and he had let the camera see what he was seeing. When Halverson tossed the placard, Reeves's jaw tightened for the first time. It was a small tightening,
It would not have been visible to a person who had not spent 14 weeks watching Reeves's face for indications of what Reeves was thinking. It was visible to Voss. Voss made a fourth tick mark. He did not write a margin note.
He did not need to. He had been a lieutenant in this department for 11 years, and he could read a young officer's jaw the way other men read a windsock. "Cell," Halverson said. He took her arm. Not the elbow this time, the bicep. He squeezed. "This way." He walked her down a short corridor. There were 3 holding cells. 2 were empty. One contained a man in a stained t-shirt who was sleeping on the bench with his face to the wall. Halverson stopped at the second cell. He unlocked it. He swung the door open. He turned Aria toward the opening. He let go of her bicep with one hand and, with the other, pushed. She stepped forward to keep her balance. The push was harder than it needed to be. Her right shoulder, the one that had hit the doorframe of the cruiser, struck the metal jamb of the cell door. She made the same small sound she had made in the cemetery. He did not hear it. He did not appear to want to. She walked into the cell. He swung the door closed. The lock engaged. "Phone call in an hour," he said. "I am entitled to my call now." "You'll get it when I say." "I am entitled to it now." Alabama Code Title 15. He looked at her through the bars. He was tired now. The adrenaline was leaving him in slow sheets, and what was left was the residue of a man who had done a thing without thinking about it, and was beginning, in some unlit room at the back of his head, to think about it. "You'll get it," he said, "when I say." He turned. He walked back down the corridor. The corridor door closed behind him. Aria Whitfield stood for a long moment in the center of the cell. She did not sit. She looked at the bench. She looked at the small steel toilet. She looked at the camera in the upper corner of the cell, mounted behind a polycarbonate dome. She looked at the camera for 2 full seconds. The camera, she knew, could see her. The camera, she knew, could record her. The camera was the only thing in the cell that mattered. She walked to the bench. She sat. She placed her cuffed hands in her lap. She closed her eyes. She began, in her head, to recite a list of 9 names. She had been keeping the list, in her own head, for 18 months. She did not write it down. She had never written it down. She had developed the practice of reciting it once a day, in the morning, while she made coffee, the way another person might recite a prayer. She recited it now, in the cell, with the camera watching. Halverson, Chase, Reeves, Tobias. Bricker, Marlene. Voss, Dane. Thackeray, Errol. Holcomb, Finn. Pelston, Roy. Donahue, Marie. Stemple, J. 9 names. 7 Bayard Springs PD officers, 1 mayor, 1 city attorney. She had not yet decided which of them, when this was all over, was the one she would charge first. She had not yet decided because she had not, until this morning, been entirely certain which of them was the most afraid of her. Now, in the cell, with the cuffs cutting into her left wrist and the ink drying on her right sleeve, she was beginning to know. In the precinct lobby, at that same moment, 3 things were happening at once. The first was that Lieutenant Voss had returned from his office with a manila folder under his arm. He had set the folder on the corner of Sergeant Bricker's counter. He had opened it. He had begun reading, slowly, the 4-page intake report Halverson had filed. He had begun, slowly, to put a small tick mark next to certain phrases in the margin. The tick marks were not red. The tick marks were a soft, dark blue, the color of a man who has not yet decided whether he is going to use them. The second was that Officer Reeves had walked, alone, to the small break room at the end of the hall. He had poured a cup of coffee he was not going to drink. He had stood, with the cup in his hand, looking out the small barred window at the parking lot. In the parking lot, on the curb 50 feet from the front door, a woman in a red blazer was sitting in the driver's seat of a silver sedan with the door open and a phone clipped to her chest harness, live streaming. Reeves could not see the phone from where he stood. He could see the woman. He could see, from her body language, that something on the phone was happening fast. He could see her looking at the screen, and then at the front door of the precinct, and then at the screen again, and her hand kept moving up to her ear as if she were listening to a voice he could not hear. The third was that the desk phone at Lieutenant Voss's elbow began to ring. Voss looked at the caller ID. The caller ID read City Hall, Mayor's Office, Direct. Voss did not pick up. He let it ring once. He let it ring twice. He let it ring a third time. Then slowly, with his eyes on the 4-page report and his pen still in his hand, he picked up the receiver. Voss. The voice on the other end was Mayor Finn Holcomb. Mayor Holcomb spoke for 19 seconds. Voss listened. He listened the entire 19 seconds. He did not interrupt. He did not speak. When the mayor was finished, Voss said, "Yes, sir," in a voice that was lower and flatter than the voice he had used a moment before, and he hung up the phone. He set the receiver down with care. He looked at the report. He looked at Bricker. "Get the chief," he said. "He's in his office. Get him out here. Lieutenant? Now, Sergeant, now." Bricker rose. She walked briskly toward the chief's office. She knocked. She entered. The door closed behind her. 11 seconds later, the door opened again, and Chief Errol Thackeray, 58 years old, 21 years on the force, 6 of them as chief, walked into the lobby with the bearing of a man who had been told something on his cell phone in the last 60 seconds that he had not yet had the time to process. Thackeray's face was the color of a man whose blood pressure had just done something his physician would not approve of. "Voss? Chief? My office. Now." "Yes, sir." Voss followed Thackeray back through the door behind the reception window. The door closed. The lobby, which had been in motion for the last 12 minutes, went still. Sergeant Bricker stood at the counter. She picked up the property log. She read it. She read the line where she had written, "Watch gold tone wrist female." She read the line above it, where she had written phone, wallet, keys, notebook leather, pens 3, tissues package sealed, cosmetic case, glasses, inhaler prescription, funeral program paper. She read the items she had not written. The card case. The pair of unmarked keys, smaller than house keys, on a separate ring inside the cosmetic case that she had moved with one finger and not entered onto the log. She put the log down. She picked up her radio. She did not transmit. She held the radio in her hand. She thought, for the first time in 11 years on the booking desk, about the chain of custody. In the break room, Officer Reeves set his coffee cup down, slowly, on the small Formica table. He took his body cam off its chest mount. He held it in his hand. He looked at the small red light. He did not turn it off. He walked back to the lobby. He walked past the reception counter. He walked to the bench where Aria's purse still sat with its contents spread across the polished steel. He looked at the spread. He saw the small silver business card case. He picked it up. He opened it. Inside were 2 cards, both white, both heavy stock. One bore, in block capitals across the top, the words Whitfield and Tate. Below it, in smaller print, Aria J. Whitfield, founding partner, civil rights litigation. Below that, an address in downtown Mobile, a telephone number, an email address. The second card was different. The second card was not from the Whitfield and Tate firm. The second card bore, in raised gold, a seal he recognized immediately, because he had seen that seal twice in his 3 months on the job, both times on the wall of a courtroom in the Mobile Federal Courthouse, where he had been called to testify in a use of force case. The seal was the seal of the United States District Court for the Southern District of Alabama. The card was the personal contact card of the Honorable Camille V. Easterly, Senior United States District Judge. It was not a generic card. It was a card with handwriting on the back. The handwriting, in fountain pen, in steady block letters, read, A. Call any time, day or night. C. Reeves stood at the bench with the card in his hand for 4 seconds. He looked at the corridor that led to the holding cells. He looked at the door to the chief's office. He looked at the lobby door, beyond which, on the curb, a woman in a red blazer was live streaming to 241,000 viewers. He looked back at the card. In his earpiece, the dispatch radio crackled. A voice, female, calm, said the chief's call sign. The chief did not respond. The voice repeated. The chief did not respond. In the chief's office, beyond the door Reeves was looking at, Chief Errol Thackeray was, at that moment, hanging up the receiver of his desk phone after a 1-minute and 48-second call with Mayor Finn Holcomb. Mayor Holcomb's instructions had been 3 sentences long. Sentence 1. Halverson is to be relieved of duty, effective immediately. Sentence 2. A statement is to be issued from the front steps of the precinct within the next 10 minutes. Sentence 3. The statement is to be drafted by the city attorney, who is on his way over now, and is to use the words decisive action, zero tolerance, and thorough internal review. Chief Thackeray sat at his desk for 40 seconds with his hand on the phone. He looked at the photograph on the wall behind his desk. The photograph was 12 years old. It showed him, in a younger uniform, at a community softball game with a group of teenagers from the East Side Youth Program. One of the teenagers in the photograph, in the back row, with a mitt on his hand and a paramedic's wristwatch already on his wrist because he had wanted to be a paramedic since he was 9, was Justin Whitfield. Thackeray had not noticed that detail before, not in 12 years. He noticed it now. He stood. He smoothed the front of his uniform shirt. He picked up his hat. He set the hat under his arm. He looked at Voss, who had been standing in the corner of the office for the entire phone call, very still. "Lieutenant, sir, get me the city attorney's draft when it comes in. I want eyes on it before I read it on the steps." "Yes, sir." "And Voss." "Sir." "Pull Halverson off the floor. Have him in the break room with his sergeant in 5 minutes. He does not leave the building until I say." "Yes, sir." Thackeray walked toward his office door. He stopped with his hand on the handle. He turned back. "Voss." "Sir." "What's the woman's name?" Voss looked down at the report on the desk. "Whitfield, sir. Aria J. Whitfield." Thackeray stood for a moment longer. He looked at the photograph on the wall once more. He opened the door. He walked out into the lobby. The lobby clock read 9:58 a.m. Outside, on the curb, the count on Naima Tatum's live stream read 247,000 and was rising, at that minute, by 4,000 viewers every 30 seconds. The front door of the precinct opened. The bell above it chimed twice. A woman in a navy suit stepped through. She did not speak. She did not need to. She walked, with the unhurried walk of a person who has not been hurried by anything in 20 years, to the reception counter. She placed both hands on the counter, palms flat. She looked once at Sergeant Bricker. She looked once at the corridor that led to the holding cells. She looked once at the door to the chief's office, through which Chief Thackeray was just at that moment emerging. Thackeray stopped in the middle of the lobby. He looked at the woman. The woman looked at him. His face, which had been the color of a man whose blood pressure was about to be a problem, became the color of a man whose blood pressure had just stopped being his only problem. "Camille," he said. It was the first word he had said in the lobby, and he had said it the way a man says the name of a person he has known for 30 years, and has, in those 30 years, never once expected to see standing in his lobby, in a navy suit, with both hands on the counter, on a Saturday morning in June, at 5 minutes to 10. The woman did not answer. She turned her head, slightly, toward the front door. The bell above the door chimed twice again. 3 more people walked in. The first of them was a man in his mid-40s, in a charcoal suit that had clearly been pulled off a hanger in a hurry, with a federal credentials wallet open in his left hand and a leather portfolio in his right. The second was a woman a little younger, in a navy blazer and slacks, with a small earpiece visible at the rim of her right ear, and the bearing of a person who was, at that moment, listening to a voice that no one else in the room could hear. The third was a tall man in a Mobile County Sheriff's deputy uniform, who took up a position 3 feet inside the door and folded his hands in front of him in the patient stance of a man who had been instructed only to be present and was being present at a level of professional detail that did not require him to do anything else. The man with the credentials wallet did not approach Sergeant Bricker. He approached the woman in the navy suit. He did not address her by title. He nodded once. She nodded once. The exchange took less than a second. He turned, then, to Chief Thackeray. "Chief Thackeray." "Yes." "Reuben Halpern, United States Attorney's Office, Southern District of Alabama. I am the Deputy Chief of the Civil Rights Section. This is Special Agent Tova Marston, FBI Mobile Field Office. We have a number of matters to discuss. I would like to begin, if it is all right with you, with the location and condition of a detainee currently in your custody, Aria Whitfield. I understand she was booked on this department's intake at approximately 09:43 this morning." Thackeray opened his mouth. He closed it. He did not say anything for 3 full seconds. Behind him, the door he had just come through opened again. Lieutenant Voss stepped through. Voss had the manila folder under his arm. He stopped 2 paces inside the lobby. He looked at Halpern. He looked at the credentials wallet. He looked at Sergeant Bricker, whose mouth had fallen slightly open and who had not, in 9 years on the booking desk, ever seen a federal credentials wallet open in her lobby. Voss did one thing, slowly, that he did not need to do. He walked 4 paces to the placard above the reception window. The placard with the heading, Alabama Code, Title 13A. Public Notice. He did not look at it. He simply stood beneath it. He set the manila folder on the small shelf below the placard. He opened the folder. He looked down at the 4-page intake report inside. He looked up. He looked at Aria's purse, still on the counter, with its contents still spread. He looked at the silver business card case, sitting where Officer Reeves had placed it back, untouched. He looked at Halpern. "Mr. Halpern." "Lieutenant, the detainee is in cell 2. She was booked at 09:43. She has not yet received her phone call. The arresting officer is Officer Chase Halverson. The booking sergeant is Sergeant Marlene Bricker. The intake report is here. I have had eyes on it for approximately 15 minutes. Halpern's expression did not change. "Lieutenant, thank you. Could you confirm for me, on the record, the basis for the arrest?" Voss looked for 1 second at Chief Thackeray. Thackeray did not look at him. Thackeray was looking at the woman in the navy suit, who was still standing at the counter with her hands flat on the surface, and Thackeray's expression, which had been the color of a man whose blood pressure had stopped being his only problem, was now the color of a man who had begun to understand that his blood pressure was no longer, in any meaningful sense, his problem at all. Voss looked back at Halpern. "The basis listed on the intake report, Mr. Halpern, is obstruction of a peace officer in the performance of his duties. The complaint that initiated the contact was an anonymous call received at 07:04 this morning. The call reported a, quote, suspicious gathering, possible disturbance, possible weapons, end quote. The address of the gathering was Street, Anselm Memorial Garden." "Lieutenant, when you say possible weapons..." "Yes, Mr. Halpern." "The dispatch log will reflect that exact language." "It will. And the dispatch log will reflect the gathering was a funeral." Voss did not answer immediately. He looked again at the placard above his head. He looked back at Halpern. "The dispatch log, Mr. Halpern, will reflect what the call said. The call did not say funeral. The dispatcher, however, knew it was a funeral. The dispatcher had, at 06:58, taken a routine procession clearance call from the funeral home director. And that call was logged. It was. 6 minutes before the anonymous tip. Yes. With the same address. Yes. Halpern looked at Special Agent Marston. Marston nodded once. She did not speak. She had not spoken since entering the lobby. She turned, slightly, toward the corridor that led to the holding cells, and did not move further than the turn. Halpern set his portfolio on the counter, gently, beside the still open property log. "Chief Thackeray, I would like to speak with the detainee, privately, in a room with a working camera and an unlocked door. I would like the room to be accessible to her counsel within the next 30 minutes. I would like, in the meantime,
The body camera footage of both responding officers preserved on a separate drive, with Lieutenant Voss as custodian, beginning the moment they are downloaded. Thackeray opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the woman in the navy suit. The woman in the navy suit, who had not yet, in any official sense, identified herself to anyone in the room, who was technically there only as a witness, who would, within the next 4 hours, by the operation of 28 U.S.C. Section 455, recuse herself in writing from any matter touching this department for the foreseeable future, did not move her hands from the counter. She did, however, allow herself, for the first time since she had walked through the door, the very smallest possible nod. It was a nod that no one in the room would have noticed, had they not, in some part of their professional training, been taught to watch for it. Thackeray noticed. "Yes," Thackeray said to Halpern. "Yes, of course." He turned then to Voss. "Lieutenant, pull Officer Halverson off the floor, now. Have Sergeant Bricker secure the property log. Lock the booking room. Nobody touches that purse. Have Officer Reeves report to the conference room with his body cam still mounted and still recording. And get me, please, the city attorney on the line, and tell him he has 6 minutes to get over here, not 10. "Yes, sir." And Voss. "Sir." "Tell him to bring the draft." Voss did not say what draft. Voss did not need to. In the cell, 3 doors down the corridor, beyond the polycarbonate dome of the cell camera, beyond the small steel toilet and the bench bolted to the wall, beyond the bars of cell 2, Aria Whitfield, who had been sitting with her cuffed hands folded in her lap and her eyes closed for the last 11 minutes, who had been reciting, in her head, the list of 9 names, opened her eyes. She heard, faintly, through the corridor walls, a man's voice she had not heard in person in 14 months, but which she would have recognized in a hailstorm. The voice of Reuben Halpern, who had clerked for her 22 years earlier, in a small federal courtroom 3 blocks from the Mobile waterfront before he had moved to the U.S. Attorney's office, and she had moved into private practice on a civil rights litigation track. She did not smile this time. She did not need to. She lifted her cuffed hands carefully, and she set them on her lap, palms down, and she waited. If this story has held you to this point, take a moment now and tap that subscribe button. What happens in Part 2 takes a small-town arrest at a graveside and turns it into a federal civil rights case that will end 3 careers before sundown and reshape Bayard Springs Police Department for the next 18 months. Aria Whitfield, in her cell, did not see them come in. She did not need to. She had heard the bell. She opened her eyes. She lifted her cuffed hands. She set them on her lap. She straightened her back, the way she had straightened it in 900 courtrooms across the state of Alabama in 26 years of practice. She looked, for one last moment, at the camera in the upper corner of the cell. She smiled, very slightly. It was the first time she had smiled since the chaplain had knocked on her door at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday 8 days earlier. It was also, although she could not yet have known it, the last expression captured by the cell camera before the precinct lost power for 41 seconds at 10:01 a.m. in a brownout that was later attributed to a fault in the building's main breaker, but that occurred, with notable timing, exactly 1 minute after the federal credentials wallet entered the lobby. In the cemetery, 3 miles away, Pastor Cornelius Pace, in front of a gathering that had not sat back down, finished the eulogy he had begun 4 hours earlier and had been unable, until that moment, to complete. He read the 3rd index card. He read it slowly. He read it twice. He folded the cards. He put them in the inside pocket of his suit. He stepped down from the lectern. He walked, alone, to the open grave. He stood at the foot of the grave for a long moment. He looked up at the sky. He turned to the gathering. He spoke 7 words. "We are not done here," he said. "Not yet." The gathering, 240 strong, did not sit. They did not move. They waited. The corridor door opened at 10:02 a.m., 41 seconds after the brownout had ended, and the man who walked through it was not Halverson and was not Reeves and was not Sergeant Bricker. Reuben Halpern, 54, with the careful gait of a federal prosecutor
who had been a federal prosecutor for 26 years, stopped 4 feet from cell 2. He set the leather portfolio under his arm. He took out a small key on a small ring, the way a man takes out a key he has been issued by someone else and is being trusted in this exact moment to use without comment. The deputy behind him handed him the cell key. He unlocked the cell door. He did not open it. He stood beside it. He looked through the bars at the woman seated on the bench. "Counselor? Reuben, are you all right? I am all right. Are you injured?" "My right shoulder, my left wrist, the ulnar nerve, the fingerprint procedure. I will document each on my own. I am opening the door now. I am not going to ask you to extend your hands. I am going to ask the deputy to come behind me and remove the cuffs and step away. You will leave this cell on your own time. We will walk to a private room and you will not pass any officer in uniform on the way." Reuben: "Yes." "Where is Camille?" "In the lobby. She has authored a 1-page recusal memorandum. She has handed it to the line clerk. It will be filed by close of business with both the Southern District Clerk and the 11th Circuit. She is here as a fact witness. She is here as nothing else." Aria nodded once. "And Halverson? In the break room? And Voss?" "In a conference room with a manila folder of his own marginalia." "Counselor." "Yes. There is a federal courthouse parking pass on the booking counter. Officer Reeves saw it. Officer Reeves saw your business card. Officer Reeves has been standing at the counter holding the card for the last 6 minutes. He has not put it down. He has not approached anyone. He is, at this moment, waiting." Aria looked at the floor of the cell. She looked back at Halpern. "What is he waiting for?" "He is waiting, I believe, to be told what to do." "Tell him." "What?" "Tell him to come to the conference room. Tell him to bring the body cam. Tell him I would like to thank him for the 4 seconds at 09:23, before Halverson cuffed me, when he stepped back instead of forward. Tell him I will not be the person to interview him. I will not be the person to do anything to him at all. But tell him that the 4 seconds were noticed." "Counselor?" "Tell him." Halpern nodded once to the deputy. The deputy unlocked the cuffs. The cuffs came off Aria's wrists. The deputy stepped back. Aria stood. She did not rub her wrists. She did not adjust her dress. She stepped out of the cell, slowly, the way a woman steps out of a cell she has already accepted she is not, in any meaningful sense, the same woman walking into. She did not walk past the booking counter. She walked with Halpern by a side corridor that led directly to a small conference room at the back of the building. The conference room had a working camera, a working clock, and a door with a deadbolt that, as of 10:04 a.m., was unlocked from the inside only. She sat at the table. She did not look at the camera. She looked at the clock. The clock read 10:05 a.m. At 10:07 a.m., the conference room door opened. Officer Tobias Reeves stepped through. He had unclipped his body cam from the chest harness as he had walked. He carried it now in his right hand, with the lens turned slightly outward and the red light still steady. He stopped 4 feet inside the door. He did not approach the table. He did not sit. Aria did not turn her head toward him. She looked instead at the place at the table opposite hers, where Halpern had been sitting until 2 minutes earlier. "Officer Reeves?" "Ma'am?" "Set the camera on the table. Lens up. Power on. Do not turn it off. Walk 3 steps back from the table. Do not approach me. Do not address me directly until you have been told you may. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Federal evidence officer will arrive in this room in approximately 4 minutes. You will surrender the camera to her by hand with your name and badge number stated for the record. You will not leave the precinct today. You will be interviewed by FBI Mobile this afternoon. You will tell them what you saw. You will tell them what you did. You will tell them what you did not do. The third of these will matter most. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." He set the camera on the table. He stepped back. He stood with his hands at his sides. Aria, for the first time since she had walked through the cemetery gate at 8:41 that morning, allowed herself one small motion.
She turned her face slightly toward the wall, away from the camera, away from the officer, away from the corridor through which Halpern had taken her, and she closed her eyes for 2 seconds. The camera caught the 2 seconds. When she opened them, she said one more sentence to Reeves. "You stepped back. At 09:23, before he cuffed me. You stepped back, and you did not raise your hand to your radio. The camera saw it. The camera will see it again, in 11 months, in front of a grand jury in Birmingham. I want you to know, officer, that a young man of your age, 3 months on a job, in a department like this, in a county like this, who steps back when stepping back is the harder thing, is a young man whose name I will remember." He did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was steadier than he had expected it to be. "Ma'am." "Yes." "I'm sorry. About your son." "Thank you, officer." "And ma'am." "Yes. Whatever the federal investigators ask, I'm going to answer." "I know." He stepped back again, 2 paces, and stood beside the door, and did not move until S.A. Marston's deputy entered the conference room at 10:11 a.m. and took the body cam, by hand, with Reeves's name and badge number stated for the record. In the lobby, at the same moment, Lieutenant Voss had walked Sergeant Bricker out from behind the booking counter and into a small conference room at the front of the building. He had carried the manila folder under his arm. He had carried the property log under his other arm. He had not spoken to her on the walk. He had set both items on the table in front of her. He had pointed, with his pen, to 2 lines on the property log. "Sergeant, Lieutenant, this is the watch. You wrote it after she asked. This is the card case. You did not write it." "Lieutenant, I am not asking you anything. I am telling you what I am going to write in my report. I am writing that the booking property log is incomplete. I am writing that the booking sergeant did not complete the log in the sequence the procedure requires. I am writing that the booking sergeant did not complete the log until prompted by the detainee. I am writing all 3. You are entitled to your union representative. You are entitled, when the federal officer arrives, to remain silent. You are entitled to a lot of things, Sergeant. The one thing you are not entitled to is for me to lie about what I saw on that counter at 9:51 a.m. Do you understand?" Bricker did not answer for a long time. When she did, she said very quietly one word. "Yes." Voss closed the manila folder. He picked up the property log. He walked out of the room. He left her sitting at the table with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the small clock above the door. The clock read 10:10 a.m. If you've come this far with us, take 10 seconds and hit subscribe. What happens in the next 9 minutes will end one career on the front steps of a precinct, with 200,000 people watching live, and begin a federal investigation that does not finish for 16 months. At 10:13 a.m., Chief Errol Thackeray walked out of the front doors of the Bayard Springs Police Department in his full-dress uniform, with his hat under his arm, and stood on the top step of the 4 concrete steps that led down to the curb. The city attorney, who had arrived in the parking lot 12 minutes earlier in a hurry he had not yet stopped being in, stood 3 feet to his left, with a single sheet of paper in his hand. The sheet had been printed at City Hall 4 minutes earlier and had been edited, in the back seat of a moving sedan, with a fountain pen, in 3 small revisions the city attorney had made on the way and that the mayor had not yet approved. The city attorney handed Thackeray the sheet. Thackeray did not look at it. Thackeray looked at Naima Tatum. Naima Tatum was 20 feet away, on the sidewalk, with her phone clipped to her chest harness and her viewer count, on the small inset display only she could see, reading 398,000 and rising at 4,000 a minute. Thackeray did not address her by name. He did not need to. He spoke into the small lapel microphone the city attorney had clipped to his collar. He read the statement. The statement was 4 sentences. He had cut the city attorney's draft from 7 sentences to 4 during the 11 seconds it had taken him to walk from the conference room to the front door. Earlier this morning, an arrest was made by an officer of this department at a private gathering at St. Anselm Memorial Garden. The conduct of that arrest is not consistent with the standards this department is sworn to uphold. Effective immediately,
Officer Chase Halverson, badge number 1147, is relieved of duty pending the outcome of a federal civil rights review by the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Alabama. This department will cooperate fully with any and every federal inquiry, beginning today. He paused. He looked at the sheet of paper once, the way a man looks at a sheet of paper to confirm that he is, in fact, deviating from it. He folded the sheet in half. He placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket. He spoke a fifth sentence the city attorney had not written. I'm also instructing that the booking property of the detainee be sealed by a federal evidence officer within the hour, and that the dispatch log of every call this department has handled this morning, beginning at 0630, be released in full to the United States Attorney's Office before the end of business. The city attorney's mouth opened slightly. He did not close it for 2 full seconds. Naima Tatum's viewer count, when Thackeray finished the sentence, read 441,000. Thackeray turned. He walked back through the front doors. The doors closed behind him. In the break room, Officer Chase Halverson, who had been seated at a small formica table for the last 7 minutes, looking at a coffee that had gone cold in front of him, heard the announcement through the small speaker mounted in the corner of the room. He did not move. His sergeant, a man named Rico Pelston, sat across from him and watched his face. Halverson did not say anything for a long time. Then he said one sentence. He fired me. Pelston did not answer. Halverson said it again. He fired me. The second time, his voice broke, in the small way that a voice breaks when a man understands, for the first time in a very long career, that he has been understood. Outside, in the parking lot, Naima Tatum's live stream rolled past 500,000. The number kept rising. Inside the conference room, Aria Whitfield sat with her hands folded on the table. The clock read 10:17 a.m. Halpern, across from her, had opened the leather portfolio and removed a single sheet of paper. The sheet bore the seal of the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Alabama. It was a 1-page recusal memorandum. It had been drafted, in advance, 6 months earlier, by Aria herself, against the contingency she had hoped, with no real expectation, never to need. She read it. She signed it. She handed it back. File it before noon. Yes, Counselor. Refer everything north of the I-65 county line, Birmingham, Acting U.S. Attorney's Office, Civil Rights Section, whoever is on intake. Yes, Counselor. And Reuben. Yes. Marston. Tova is in the lobby. I will need her in person at the house before 3 p.m. Marcus has something. He told me this morning. He has been carrying it for 2 weeks. Counselor. He told me 3 hours ago in my own front hall. He did not say what it was. He said Justin had told him to give it to me, not to the captain, not to internal, to me, specifically. Halpern looked at her for a long, steady moment. He had clerked for her, 22 years earlier, in a small federal courtroom 3 blocks from the Mobile waterfront. He had known her, in some real sense, longer than her sister had. He had also, in 22 years, never once asked her a question she had already answered with her face. I will have Tova at the house by 2. Thank you, Reuben. Counselor. Yes. He was 24. Yes. I am very sorry. I know. She did not cry. Halpern did not press. He stood. He gathered the portfolio. He walked to the door of the conference room. He stopped with his hand on the handle. Counselor. Yes. The kid in the parking lot 8 days ago. The wreck on County Road 19. There is a 14-minute gap on the responding cruiser's dash. The cruiser was BSPD 19. The cruiser was driven by Halverson. Aria did not answer for a long time. When she did, she said one word. Find it. Yes, ma'am. He went out. The door closed behind him. Aria placed her right hand, palm flat, on the table. She held it there for 11 seconds. She did not weep. She did not move. The camera in the corner of the conference room, which was on, recorded 11 seconds of a 51-year-old woman holding her hand on a table in a small back room of a small police precinct on a Saturday morning in June. And that footage, like Reeves's body cam footage, like Ayanna Beaumont's phone footage, like Naima Tatum's live stream, was preserved by federal evidence officer on a separate drive, with Lieutenant Voss as initial custodian and S.A. Marston as transferee, and was, 11 months later, played in full, without comment, in a federal courtroom in Birmingham. Marcus Llewellyn arrived at the Whitfield home at 1:15 p.m. He had gone home from the cemetery at noon. He had stood in his bedroom for 40 minutes. He had walked, finally, to a panel in his closet wall he had installed 8 months earlier, and he had pulled the panel out, and he had taken from behind it a black thumb drive on a small keyring, a leather notebook bound with elastic, and a cardboard envelope containing 9 4x6 photographs. He had put all 3 items into a manila folder. He had driven to Briarvine Lane. Delphine answered the door. Marcus did not say anything. He held out the folder. Delphine looked at it. She did not take it. "Marcus?" "He told me, if anything. He told me give them to her." "She is at the federal building. She will be there until late this evening. She has authorized me to receive on her behalf." "Mrs. Bray?" "Yes." "I need it logged." "Logged." "Logged. By federal, not by sheriff. Not by Bayard Springs. Federal." Delphine looked at him for a long, even moment. She did not, in the way that no one in the family ever did, ask Marcus to repeat himself. She picked up her phone. She dialed the number Aria had written on a sticky note and pressed to the kitchen counter that morning. Special Agent Tova Marston answered on the second ring. The drive, the notebook, and the photographs were in the custody of FBI Mobile by 2:04 p.m. They were transported in a sealed evidence bag, in a sealed evidence box, in the back of an unmarked sedan, by Special Agent Marston herself, accompanied by a forensic technician with a portable right blocker. The chain of custody, beginning at 1:52 p.m. at the front door of the Whitfield home, with Delphine Whitfield Bray as the first signatory, ran without interruption across the next 11 months, and survived, unchallenged, every motion to suppress, filed by every defense counsel involved. The thumb drive contained, in order, 412 audio files, 63 photographs, 18 video clips, and a single document titled CR-19/04-26/1626-1640/open. The audio files were dash camera audio captures, recorded by Justin Whitfield's personal handheld recorder during his shifts on Mobile County EMS Unit 947. They were recorded between November of the previous year and the Wednesday of his death. They captured, among other things, 11 separate roadside encounters between Officer Chase Halverson and motorists on a back service road known as County Road 19, over a span of 14 weeks. Each encounter was conducted without a warrant, without probable cause as defined by the Fourth Amendment, and in 7 of the 11 cases, without a body camera that, according to BSPD logs, had been down for maintenance on the dates in question. In 4 of the cases, the motorists were black. In all 4 of those cases, items had been removed from the vehicle and not entered onto any subsequent property log. The items included, by Justin's annotation, a wallet containing $640 in cash, a watch, a ring, and a portable speaker. The notebook contained, in Justin's handwriting, a chronological record of each incident, with dates, times, badge numbers, and Justin's own annotations regarding what he had observed and from what distance. The photographs contained, in 9 separate frames, images of Halverson at the rear of a stopped motorist's vehicle, with the trunk open, with no other officer present, with no body camera visible, on the dates and at the times that matched the audio captures. The single document marked CR-19/04-26/1626-1640/open was a draft. It had been last edited by Justin at 4:19 p.m. on the Wednesday of his death. It was 22 minutes before he died. The draft was a memorandum addressed to the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Alabama, requesting a meeting. The first line of the memorandum read, "I have audio of Officer Chase Halverson, Bayard Springs PD, badge 1147, conducting 11 warrantless searches over 14 weeks on County Road 19. I have reason to believe Halverson is aware that I am aware. I am requesting a meeting at your office at the earliest available date. I am willing to provide all materials in my possession. I am the son of the addressee." The memorandum was unsigned. It had been saved. It had not been sent. If you have stayed with this story to here, the next 10 minutes will tell you exactly how a department comes apart in slow motion, in real procedural time, in months and not in days. Hit subscribe and stay with us. By 6 p.m. on the day of the funeral, Officer Chase Halverson had been formally relieved of duty, escorted from the Bayard Springs PD precinct, and asked by Lieutenant Voss in writing to surrender his department-issued sidearm, his badge, his radio, and his vehicle key. Halverson had complied. He had walked to his personal vehicle in the parking lot. He had sat in the driver's seat for 11 minutes. He had not driven anywhere. He had been observed the entire 11 minutes by Special Agent Marston from the parking lot exit. By 8 p.m., the city of Bayard Springs had issued a second statement, longer than the first, signed by Mayor Finn Holcomb and the City Council President, announcing the placement of Sergeant Marlene Bricker on paid administrative leave pending review of the booking property log, and the placement of Lieutenant Dane Voss on what the statement called supervisory limited duty, which was a term the city attorney had invented in the back seat of his car on the way to the second drafting session, and which corresponded to no actual policy in the BSPD personnel manual. By 11 p.m., Naima Tatum's live stream had ended, and the recorded archive had been viewed, on her primary channel alone, 2,100,000 times. By midnight, the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Alabama had filed, with the clerk of the U.S. District Court, a written notice of recusal. The notice was signed by Aria Whitfield in her capacity as United States Attorney for the Southern District of Alabama. The notice acknowledged that, by the operation of 28 U.S.C. Section 528, no attorney in her office could properly investigate or prosecute a case in which she was a victim, a witness, or a person closely related to a victim or witness. The notice referred the matter, with the consent of the Attorney General's office in Washington, to the acting United States Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama in Birmingham for assignment. The case was assigned, the following Monday, to Assistant United States Attorney Devorah Linwood, age 41, 10 years with the Department of Justice, 3 of them on the Civil Rights section. She convened a federal grand jury in 8 days. She convened it in Birmingham. The grand jury sat for 9 weeks. In the 9th week, it returned indictments on the following counts. Count 1, Chase Halverson, deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242, with a sentencing enhancement for bodily injury based on the medical record taken at Mobile General Hospital on the afternoon of the funeral, documenting the right shoulder contusion, the left ulnar nerve compression, and the right index finger crescent bruise. Count 2, Chase Halverson. Chase, falsification of records in a federal investigation, 18 U.S.C. Section 1519, based on the intake report dated the morning of the arrest. Count 3, Chase Halverson, obstruction of a federal civil rights investigation, also under Section 1519, based on the body camera maintenance status entries on 11 dates over 14 weeks. Count 4, Marlene Bricker, false statements in a federal matter, 18 U.S.C. Section 1001, based on the booking property log of the morning of the funeral. Count 5, Marlene Bricker, obstruction, Section 1519. Same. The grand jury did not return an indictment on Lieutenant Dane Voss. Lieutenant Voss had, by the 3rd week of the grand jury proceedings, entered a written cooperation agreement with the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama. The agreement was filed under seal. It became a matter of public record 14 months later, by stipulation of the parties. The grand jury did not return an indictment on Mayor Finn Holcomb. The grand jury did issue a subpoena to Mayor Finn Holcomb. The subpoena was returnable in the 11th week. Mayor Holcomb, on the advice of personal counsel, invoked his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination on 23 of the 28 questions asked of him. He answered 5 questions. The 5 questions were the ones his personal counsel had agreed, in advance, that he could safely answer. They concerned the address of his home, the date of his birth, his title, the name of his predecessor, and whether he knew the meaning of the word perjury. He answered yes to the last one. The Bayard Springs City Council, the following week, suspended Mayor Holcomb without pay by a vote of 6-1, pending the outcome of the federal investigation. A recall petition was filed by a coalition of community members 14 days later. It collected the required signatures in 11 days. The recall election was scheduled for the following October. By month 4 of the federal proceedings, the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., had opened a formal pattern or practice investigation of the Bayard Springs Police Department under 34 U.S.C. Section 12601. The investigation was led, on the federal side, by a senior Civil Rights Division attorney named Estelle Markham. Markham requested and received 3 years of internal affairs records, 6 months of body camera archives, and the personnel files of every officer who had served on the BSPD under Chief Thackeray's tenure. She found, by month 7, a documented pattern of warrantless roadside searches, falsified body camera maintenance logs, and complaints disposition records that, in her later findings letter, she described as indicative of a department-wide practice of evading constitutional review through the deliberate creation of evidence gaps. The findings letter was issued at month 9. The city of Bayard Springs entered consent decree negotiations at month 11. The consent decree was signed at month 16. It mandated, among other things, a federal monitor for a minimum of 3 years, the implementation of redundant body camera storage, the creation of a civilian review board with subpoena power over disciplinary proceedings, and the rewriting of the BSPD's use of force, fingerprint procedure, and booking property policies. The decree was signed by the Bayard Springs City Council, by the acting United States Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama, by the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, and by the President of the Mobile County NAACP, who had, by then, opened a public defender intake office in a leased storefront across the street from the BSPD precinct. The decree was not signed by Mayor Finn Holcomb. By month 16, Mayor Finn Holcomb had been recalled from office by a margin of 72 to 28%. He had not yet been federally indicted. He had also not yet been federally cleared. His matter, in the official phrasing of the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama, was ongoing. Chase Halverson pleaded guilty at month 12 to 1 count of deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242, in exchange for the dismissal of count 3. He was sentenced, at month 13, to 33 months in federal custody, followed by 3 years of supervised release. He was disqualified, by operation of state law, from ever holding a peace officer commission in the state of Alabama, or in any other state participating in the National Decertification Index. He served 28 months of his sentence at a federal facility in Pensacola. He was released the following spring. He did not return to Bayard Springs. Marlene Bricker pleaded guilty at month 10 to a single count under Section 1001. She received a sentence of probation, 12 months, no time served. She resigned her position with the Bayard Springs Police Department on the day of her plea hearing. She did not seek another position in law enforcement. Lieutenant Dane Voss, by stipulation of his cooperation agreement, was demoted to officer rank and was reassigned, at his own written request, to a community policing unit operating under the new Civilian Review Board's oversight. He continued to serve under federal monitor supervision for the duration of the consent decree. Officer Tobias Reeves, at the recommendation of Special Agent Marston and at the request of Assistant United States Attorney Linwood, was identified, in the federal court record, as a cooperating witness. He testified at the grand jury.
He testified at 3 of the subsequent proceedings. He was promoted at month 9 to detective rank and was assigned by the new chief of police to the BSPD's Reformed Internal Affairs Unit, where he remained for 6 years. Chief Errol Thackeray took early retirement at month 4. He did not contest his pension. He did not appear at any subsequent proceeding. He gave one interview to Naima Tatum at month 9 in his own kitchen. The interview ran 46 minutes. He apologized for nothing he had not done. He apologized for the fact that he had not done more, and he apologized for the fact that he had not done it sooner. The interview was viewed on Naima's channel 4 million times in its first 24 hours. The new chief of police, appointed by an interim mayor following Holcomb's recall, was a 48-year-old former assistant chief from Mobile named Sandrine Vereen. She wore the uniform with the same hat under the arm formality Thackeray had worn it. She did not, however, sign reports she had not read. The city of Bayard Springs, by stipulation, paid $1,850,000 in settlement to Aria J. Whitfield in resolution of her Section 1983 claim. The settlement included no admission of liability. It included a written apology from the city council. It also included a separate settlement of $240,000 to a paramedic named Marcus Llewellyn, who had, on the morning of the second federal grand jury proceeding, agreed to testify under his own name, with his face on the record, and who was, by stipulation of the cooperation agreement, also entered into a federal protection arrangement that lasted 13 months. Aria Whitfield used the settlement money in 3 parts. She used the first part to establish a paramedic legal defense fund within the Mobile County EMS, named for her son. She used the second part to fund the operating costs for the first 3 years of the Public Defender Intake Office across from the BSPD precinct. She used the third part to pay, in full, the closing costs on a small house on Briarvine Lane, 3 doors down from her own, which she purchased and quietly placed in trust to be conveyed, with no fanfare and no signage, to a young paramedic of her son's age, of any race, of any background, who was the first in the family to enter the field, when one was identified by the foundation Aria did not put her name on. She did not name the foundation. It was named for her son. There were 2 threads, when the consent decree was signed and the federal monitor began her work, that were not resolved. The first was the source of the anonymous tip that had been called in to BSPD dispatch at 07:04 on the morning of the funeral. The voice analysis, conducted by FBI Mobile in month 2, was inconclusive. The phone was a prepaid cellular, purchased 6 days before in cash, in a town 56 miles from Bayard Springs, by a person whose face was not captured on any retail surveillance system. The number had not been used after the call. The matter, in the federal record, remained open. The second was the 14-minute gap in the dash camera feed of the BSPD cruiser that had responded to Justin Whitfield's wreck on the afternoon of the Wednesday, 8 days before the funeral. The cruiser was BSPD-19. The cruiser had been driven on that afternoon by Officer Chase Halverson. The dash camera log entry for the 14-minute gap read, in handwriting, as it had read for every other gap, "Out for maintenance." The maintenance had not been logged in the maintenance schedule. The footage was never recovered. In the leather notebook Justin had left with Marcus, on a page dated the Wednesday morning of his death, in Justin's neat, slanting hand, was a single line, underlined twice. Meeting M, 1630, the Spur. M in the notebook was not identified. The Spur in the notebook was not identified. On the first anniversary of the funeral, Aria Whitfield drove, alone, to St. Anselm Memorial Garden. She arrived at 6:05 a.m. She walked from the gate to the small white pavilion on her own. She passed the bench where she had been seated by Halverson, and she did not stop. She walked to the grave. She placed a small bundle of yellow tea roses, cut from the bush in her own front yard, on the headstone. She did not speak. She stood for 9 minutes. She turned. She walked back to her car. At the gate, she stopped, briefly, beside the curb where 1 year earlier, the
The BSPD-19 cruiser had been parked with its lights off and its engine running. The curb was empty. The cruiser was gone. The blonde officer who had stood beside its driver's side door was, on that morning, 12 months and 2 weeks into a 33-month sentence in a federal facility 408 miles east, and would not, by any state's certification standard, ever wear a uniform again. She drove home. In her front yard, on the porch, a manila envelope had been placed against the front door. It had no return address. It had no postage. It had been hand-delivered, sometime between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m., by a person no security camera in the neighborhood had captured. She picked it up. She opened it inside. The envelope contained one item. It was a single sheet of paper. The paper was a photocopy. The photocopy was of a notebook page. The notebook page was in Justin Whitfield's handwriting. The notebook page was not from the leather notebook Marcus had brought to Delphine on the day of the funeral. It was from a different notebook. A notebook that had not, in any prior accounting, surfaced. The page was dated 3 days before Justin's death. It bore a single line, underlined 3 times. It read, "M is not Halverson. M is up. Meeting Wednesday, the Spur." Aria stood in her front hall with the photocopy in her hand for a long moment. She did not call anyone. She did not weep. She walked slowly to her study. She unlocked the small fireproof file cabinet beside her desk. She opened the top drawer. She filed the photocopy in a folder marked in her own handwriting, with no name and no number, only with a single typed legend that had been printed on the folder tab 6 months earlier. The legend read, "Open." She closed the drawer. She closed the cabinet. She walked back to the kitchen. She made coffee in a French press. She drank it standing at the kitchen counter. She watched the morning light move across the floor. She had a list of 9 names. She would, in time, find the 10th.